Yes, hello, hello. Let's start with the class today. It is a new form of class we'll be having since our university is going totally into the future, which I like because we are the future. We are the future, so we set the pace. And the class on cinema being online is not particularly revolutionary, I think. But in any case, I'm very much pleased to be able to teach this class from my personal studio, which is the place from where I used to screen my own television because I used to have a television station. So I'm very much happy that it's here. You can see this green screen, and I have all the necessary material for screening and working. So this is a place where I am very much happy to teach a class on cinema. So welcome, welcome. Let me send a note to everybody for you to know that the class is here. No, I've sent a note already, so it's not necessary. I think everybody got it. So you already know. In any case, I'll simply start and then I'll upload it on our Blackboard for you to be able to have access to the class at your own leisure. So today we'll be talking about gendering African cinema and about playing roles in gender roles in African cinema. So I'm very much happy that we are closing the semester. I think all of us are a little bit happy, although I'm sad that we will not see each other anymore in the course of this semester. But I hope to provide you with the content that will make up for the classes that we will not have individually or that we will not have face to face. The two films I ask you to watch and to compare. I have a deep apology. I did not read your responses yet, and but I'll come back to them. The films, the first we watched in class, Molade by Simon Osman, and the one I wanted you to watch, Alpha Win, films made by men. And so therefore I wanted us today to address that particular aspect of masculine feminism, which, or the history of it, or at least how men presented women in African cinema, and how it composed a particular discourse of in African cinema, of a particular gender discourse in African cinema. The topic is important because African cinema is composed in the sense of a dialectics. So we first of all have colonial cinema that excludes blacks. So the first step is colonial cinema out of which blacks are excluded. And then you have films made by blacks, but mostly men. And then those men represent women. So you have a dialectical evolution that is important for us to address. And gender is the second chapter in that evolution. So we are opening the second chapter of African cinema now, because the first filmmakers of African cinema were obviously men, and you saw it in films made in Egypt, for instance, the centrality of the belly dancer. You saw it in the films made from Senegal or even in other countries. So therefore, the shift from white to black and from male to female is important if one wants to understand the evolution of African cinema. So in that shift, the second chapter is the gender shift. And that's what we're addressing today. To be able to talk about it, it is important to go back to some of the visuals we addressed and watched and discussed in class already by the beginning of the semester, when we were talking about Ghana, about the constitution of African cinema out of popular forms of expression, out of traveling theater in particular, in West Africa. And there we address the tradition of the Ghanaian concert parties, the Ghanaian cantatas. And that's where I'd like us to start. Now, before I even say something, I'd like to say how we will proceed. So in general, for the next sessions, I'll use YouTube, my channel, to present a lecture and to do it in such a way that you can write your comments. So you can write your comments here if you have questions, if you have remarks. So please write your remarks, comments here. And then I'll read them and I'll react and I'll discuss and I'll add some more. So that is how we'll interact with each other. And after the lecture, I'll upload it and put it on Blackboard for everybody to have access to it. Right, so that is the best way for us to have it, to have the form of a class, a semblance of a class, right? But then on Blackboard, accordingly, where, under documents, you'll have the visual materials that I will be using in the class, because the class is not only a reading class, it is a class on cinema, and the class is based on visuals. So I'd like us to address pictures and videos. So that's where those videos will be uploaded. So for instance, if you go on the session of today, you'll have a couple of videos that will give the backbone of the session that I'm having right now. And so you can watch them. You don't have to watch all of them. It is a mixture of videos and screenshots and pictures that provide a background to what I'm talking about, because obviously what I'm talking about is new to you. So let us therefore go step by step and use that procedure going from YouTube to Blackboard, from Blackboard to YouTube, to be able to compose a class. I suspect because I'll be talking only and not screening, and the screening time will take some more time, the class itself will not be the usual 1 hour, 30 minutes or so. It will be shorter than that. But then you'll substantiate the rest with the visuals that you'll be watching. Right? So the visuals, again, are on Blackboard under Documents. If you go under Documents, you'll have access to them. You have a list. And that is where, at the end of the lecture, I'll upload the lecture of today for you to be able to watch. So that's where I'll upload it. Right? And if you have questions, please write your questions here on YouTube, and I'll see your questions and I'll react to it. But if your question comes after the lecture, you can still send me an email. Obviously, I'll respond to it, or etc., etc. That's how we'll proceed, and that's how we'll have an effective class. So having said that, the topic of today is the position of gender in the history of African cinema. And like I was saying, at its constitution, African cinema was combatant against colonial cinema that was disparaging Black people, excluding Black people, etc., excluding Africans. But the first generation of African filmmakers were themselves male. So therefore, the second revolution, the second change in the history, in the trajectory of African cinema, is gender, is how gender discussions are presented in African cinema. So that is what the session of today is about. And to be able to address that, the best place to start is not ancient Africa. Of course, one can start by saying ancient Africa was like this, was like that. And there are many theories that will say that ancient Africa had a matrilineal system. So there are many theories that will say that. That is not where we'll be starting. We will not be starting with anthropological or cultural discourses. No, we are dealing with histories of representation. That is what we are dealing with. Cinema is a technology of representation. Therefore, let us start with one important element in the history of African representation. So it is Ghanaian traveling theater. So if you go under Documents on Blackboard, you have the first link I have there. If you click on it, it opens on if you click on it, it opens on the traveling theater of the 30s, actually of the 20s. It's the 20s already in Ghana. Right? So if you do that, you'll see that we are tapping into one of the earliest modern, meaning composed in relation to Europe, modern in that sense, forms of representation coming from the African continent. So let's listen a little bit to what is happening here.
The first innovation to this amateur tradition came in the late 1920s, when a group of schoolboys found they could make a little money by taking their shows out into nearby towns and villages, and decided to make a career of it. Escaping futures as clerks or technicians in the administration and industry of the colony, these young men were the first truly professional entertainers in Ghanaian culture, the first to make performing their sole livelihood. In addition to performing popular songs and dances from Europe and America, they staged short comedy sketches that gently mocked the social aspirations of their Anglophile peers with a trio of stock characters. The gentleman, J.S. Ansa, was an educated English-speaking man about town.
When you appear as a...
Okay, so we already talked about it in class, if you remember well, but we talked about it in the context of addressing blackface. We use that specific example, but addressing something else, addressing race. The example wasn't enough, analyzed enough. Today, I'd like us to use the same example to address gender. Because in the group that is presented there, in the group that appears, you have a third character that becomes significant. You have a third character that becomes significant. Let's listen.
The lady was well-dressed and sophisticated. Buffoons barely distinguishable from each other, but the lady was well-dressed and sophisticated, keen on all things British, and was played by a man, Charles Horton.
Before my religious hats, felt hats. There were no big, they used felt hats. And, yeah, they dressed like a good white lady.
Okay, you see? So, there we go. We have already during the 20s and 30s, and it is a video that I'd like you to watch. We have during the 20s and 30s on the stage in Ghanaian traveling theater, we have men dressing as women to play female roles. That's what I want us to put on the table. That's what I want us to remember. You have very interesting pictures that present that. You know, those first actors, simply amazing, I would say, simply amazing, mesmerizing, men playing women. And watch that small video. It is 7 minutes. I'm not going to play it here now. If you were in class, I would have played it a little longer, but watch it. So it is very much informative of how during colonialism, men were playing women. I think it is important for us to remember that, because the structure in which the woman appears is totally masculine. It is a form of masculine theater that excludes women, and that's why men play women there. And it is singing, and of course, blackface, etc. So it is a very much a mixture. It is really funny. A mixture of comedy, singing, dancing, etc., and color, race, all that. It is something that you want to think about. So that is Ghana. That is where I want us to start in terms of representation, in terms of histories of representation, in terms of structures of representations, in terms of regimes of representation. So that is Ghana. That is Ghana. The second example I would like us to have, is Nigeria. Nigeria goes another route, and now it is the 40s. It is Hubert Ogunde. We also mentioned Hubert Ogunde, and we'll come back to him by the end of the semester when we'll talk about Nollywood, because he is one of the foundational characters of not only Nigerian traveling theater, but also of Nollywood, of the Nigerian version of Hollywood. So now if you have Hubert Ogunde's relation to, there's somebody saying, that doesn't see the doesn't see the how am I going to do that? I see one person seeing it here, and I see somebody on the other side saying that that he or she doesn't see it. How am I going to welcome to live chat? Remember the guy of privacy, etc., etc. They say doesn't see. No. Sorry, I see one person there and another person he doesn't see. No. I'm sorry. I think I see other people seeing there, but I don't know why the other ones don't see. If you could react to tell me what is happening, I would be very happy. Because some folks say that they don't see the live streaming, but I see some people there. How do you see them? No. Anyway, let me simply continue, and then I'm going to post it, and all of you will have access to it anyway. So I was talking about the Ghanaian aspect of representing gender and shifting to the Nigerian one. The Nigerian one is classical with Hubert Ogunde. If you watch Hubert Ogunde's presentation of himself, you will realize yourself that it is simply a traditional presentation of gender, in the sense that
Don't miss a moment. Live TV from 70 plus.
In the sense that polygamy is the modus operandi here, and in the sense that we have a patriarch practically who is running his theater as if it is a general family. So let's listen to him.
It's a thing that I think I like very much. This is our life.
Ibisami, or Madame as she is called, apart from being his senior wife, is his most important frontline actress. In fact, most of his wives and daughters act or help in the management of the company. Keeping it in the family makes good business sense for Bunde.
It's not possible to make an audition for a wife before you marry her anyway. And so you cannot say, I want to marry you, come, I do an audition for you. No. I marry my wives before ever they come into the theater, before I bring them onto the stage. But I know usually I don't marry any woman in Lagos.
The conventional idea is that the Lagos woman is fast and sophisticated, a go-go girl, as we say. It's also the way we...
I think I have Joel, who is telling me here that I did send you to the wrong account. I don't know how to send you now to this account. Oh my goodness. So how am I going to do? So let me send a note to everybody now quickly to say what is happening. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think I may circumvent it a little bit. Mm-hmm. So let's see what it is. Let's see what it is. Voilà. I think it is working well. Some were yes, exactly. I think it is going well now. Some did find me. I apologize for that. Today is the day when we are trying and testing, and now I have the solution. I think yes. Uh-huh. Okay. Fantastic. Look, I apologize. Now, most of you could find me. Exactly. So I was talking about the Nigerian experiment in gender representation, which is a classical, I would say, pre-colonial even form of representation, where polygamy is the center, where a pater familias plays with his wife and transforms that into a theater group. So the example I was giving was the example of Hubert Ogunde. Because some of you just joined, I think it may be fair to play again. And because some of you I'm not going to go back to the Ghanaian experiment. That was totally innovative, but I'm going to start to continue simply with Roberto Gunde and have him play a little bit
together like brothers and sisters. It's a thing that I think I like very much. This is our life.
Ibisami, or Madame as she's called, apart from being his senior wife, is his most important frontline actress. In fact, most of his wives and daughters act or help in the management of the company. Keeping it in the family makes good business sense for Gunde.
It's not possible to make an audition for a wife before you marry her anyway. And so you cannot say, I want to marry you, come, I do an audition for you. No. I marry my wives before ever they come into the theater, before I bring them onto the stage. But I know usually I don't marry any woman in Lagos.
The conventional idea is that the Lagos woman is fast and sophisticated, a go-go girl, as we say. It's also the way we see those young girls who have been to the more distant big cities like
You see, even in his own understanding of himself, he sets himself as a traditional character. So it is a pre-colonial character there, a pre-colonial character, because in many African countries, polygamy will be exactly banned by the Christian church. So therefore, by colonialism. So the form of representation and the gender role that Ogunde plays, that he enacts, is a traditional one. It is a one that understands the leading actor as a part of family. And when you watch those small clips I have on Blackboard, you understand what I'm talking about. You understand that we have here a very much traditional understanding of the role of an actor and also of representation. So that is what is at play with Ogunde. There is a second video. I'm going to play simply a part of it also for you to see what I mean when I talk about traditional. So let us have.
Chief Ogunde is a traditionalist. Unlike most traditional Africans, he has a large family. His inseparable partner in caring for that family is his senior wife, Ibisomi, who takes responsibility for the household and seeing that the other wives, the children, the grandchildren, everyone contributes both to the family's domestic and professional life. For many years, they have lived in a large, comfortable house in the suburb of Lagos, Nigeria's capital. The household is a community where the women have both influence and power, especially economic power. A community with relationships more subtle than the impression given in the press when Ogunde and his theater visited Britain in 1969.
Traditionally, Africans don't count the number of their wives.
There we go. We have a traditional understanding of gender roles there. That is a video I would like you to watch. I have two of such on Blackboard, and where our interaction will always lead us back to, because it will give us a sense, it will give us a content, it will give some content to what our class is or is trying to do. It will give you some visuals to the tone, to the audio that you hear. So that is Ogunde. He plays a paterfamilias and he presents gender roles in the pre-colonial sense. And you have a continuity between him and the one who came after him, who is Doro Ladipo. Doro Ladipo was also a very much important character in Nigerian traveling theater. And those two characters are important because they defined Nollywood, they defined the Nigerian modern form of cinema. And as a matter of fact, Hubert Ogunde is a pillar of Nollywood. He's one of the founding fathers of Nollywood indeed. So let us have the video on Doro Ladipo to compare or to have a different view inside the same Nigerian understanding of characterization.
This type of play, Obakoso, Bawaja, Obamoro, different types. So they've been praised. That makes us happy and confident that we shall expect a good crowd. The music comes first. The type of
so he presents the kind of play, and now we have a
in Yoruba country. Culturally, we are not made to have only one wife. We have wives according to how we are able to feed them. In theater, I have found that I have been missing some important stars in my company, and I decided to start to marry those that are very useful to me. Presently, I have 3 wives. My first wife is by name Mabel. She takes care of the children at home, while the other 2 wives go along with me on tour. My second wife, who is the greatest star I have, is Abiodun. She plays the leading role every time because she has a wonderful voice. She's just talented with voice. She sings wonderfully, and she is a very serious actress. The third one is Bisi Idowu. She's very talented. She's one of the best dancers I have. She can dance very well. She was one of the foundation members of the theater as Abiodun was. And so the two are keenly interested in theater. And I hope two of them will survive, will just be sufficient for me presently, because I can't feed them more than two at present in the theater. I have to think for some years again before I can get another very talented actress to make three wives I want to keep in the theater.
As you can see with Joe Oladipo, the relation between, between being Sean is there. Hello, Sean. Between his wives and playing roles, it's really marital. It is. He gets married to his actresses and they play in his, theater. It is a continuation of something that one already had with Hubert Ogunde, right? So it is a traditional pre-colonial understanding of acting and of gender roles. So it is a combination between sexuality and playing, but in a very much dominant, oppressive role for women. So because we have more here, I would like us to have, to come back to the Ghanaian experiment in that particular form and done 10 years before Doro Oladipo and Hubert Ogunde. And also in traveling theater. It is in traveling theater. We are coming back to a video we already watched, but we talked about it in combination with something else. We're talking about blackface. We're talking about blackface. And I'd like us to have the same video, but address something else, address something totally
the first innovation to this amateur tradition came in the late 1920s, when a group of schoolboys found they could make a little money by taking their shows out into nearby towns and villages, and decided to make a career of it. Escaping futures as clerks or technicians in the administration and industry of the colony, these young men were the first truly professional entertainers in Ghanaian culture, lived to make trouble between his master and his mistress, generally by revealing that his master was broke or that his mistress was unfaithful. The two men were both buffoons, barely distinguishable from each other, but the lady was well-dressed and sophisticated, keen on all things British, and was played by a man, Charles Horton.
Before my age, felt hats. There were no big dogs. They used felt hats. They dressed like a good white lady. Beautiful.
More than 60 years later, the types are still largely in place, though the aspirations targeted for mockery have shifted. In this short comedy by the Kumapim Royals, the woman is now real. She speaks Tree.
There we go. So in that short clip, we have the real evolution in the acting of gender in the representation of Africans in theater, and that is something which will be transported in cinema. But remember that the Ghanaian experiment is not unique. It's not unique because in many other African countries, the playing of gender was part of pre-colonial traditional cultures. I simply took those two examples because we are talking about the arts of representation after colonialism and the way they interacted with gender as a way of seeing how the dialectics in the history of African cinema was displayed across the line of, first of all, race and then of gender. So in Ghana, we see that men playing women. It is a normal feature, particularly in traveling theater, something that did not happen in Nigeria, even though Nigeria and Ghana are both in West Africa and are both tapping into Western forms of representation. So I like us to remember that. I have said it already on Blackboard. You have videos of all the things that I'm talking about here where you can watch, because they are also presenting very important pictures that visualize the concepts that I am addressing right now. And if you go on Blackboard again, you roll down a little bit, you'll see on the screenshot, you open it, you'll have some screenshots I did of photos of those of those films, where you can actually see in the middle. You can see, for instance, for Ghana, you see the wife there, who is played by a man, and you see how she has transformed herself from strong male that she was into a female character. So you have those that Ghanaian experiment, and I think that is something we want to start with in terms of the acting of gender, the acting of roles, and the new forms of representation across gender. Ghana, Nigeria. Let us go further in West Africa and take Senegal. We watched parts of the film Black Girl already, and I just to put Sembène Ousmane into context. You remember Sembène Ousmane grew up with all those characters. So to understand the revolution in what Sembène Ousmane did, it is important to put him in a history of representation. It is important to see him as with the background of the art forms, of the representative forms that were around him. So if you take the film Black Girl, of which we already watched a couple of shots, particularly the one having as background political figures like in my office here. So you remember well that in one of those, you had a young man having pictures of Patrice Lumumba behind him. So it was a shot taken from the film Black Girl. So Black Girl is one of the first films of Sembène Ousmane. It is one of the films in which he actually, through which he actually established himself as a major African filmmaker, because it is a film that got an award, made in 1965, I think, and in 1965, it is one of the films through which he established himself. Ideologically, but also as a filmmaker. And it's important ideologically because through that film, he presented, the main character is a woman. The main character is a woman. And that is quite unique for the generation of filmmakers of his time. But also not that unique, because if you compare him, for instance, with other filmmakers like Maître Hondo, particularly, you will see that for all the filmmakers who had an ideological backbone, who came from ideology into cinema, using a female character as the main character was an ideological position. For all the filmmakers who came from the theater, from literature, from philosophy, from trade unions, etc., into cinema, using a female character was a way of saying that they side with the oppressed. It was a way of presenting the character of oppression. It was a way of siding with the weak. It was a way of siding with minority, etc., etc., etc. It was the way of siding with the proletariat. That is what I'm trying to say. So woman there, gender there plays an ideological position. It is not simply presenting a woman or a star, which is possible. And you saw with the belly dancer, you saw that it is possible to de-ideologize that position. For instance, the film Halfawin, you see a film made by a man presenting women, but removed from the ideology of Marxism. Semen Usman is deeply rooted in Marxism. He presents women from the point of view of Marxism. They are not women, they are ideological characters. And as such, his feminism is a feminism of the left that runs back to the 19th century, if you want, August Bebel, etc., where women, or even to the 18th century, one can say, in philosophy, etc., where women stand for the oppressed, as slaves would stand for the oppressed as well. So in that particular constellation, we have an ideological understanding of women that stands apart from a younger generation of male, Alpha Win, for instance, who presents women now going from a different tradition, the tradition of the belly dancer, of Egyptian theater, etc. He wants to subvert it, and he wants to subvert it by using women more sexually, if you want, but from the point of view of childhood, of a child who discovers his own sexuality, but also a sexed world around him. So we have two different presentations of gender there, right? But all of them inside a discourse that is composed by men. Now, if you open the the screenshot, you'll have on Semen Usman an insistence on two things. The first is that his presentation of women is only possible on the basis of a dispossession of power from men. So that happens in the film Borom Saret, a film of 1963, where you vividly see a veteran who kneels down and a police officer puts his foot on the medal of that veteran. And Semen Usman will take that symbolism in other films, for instance, in Hala, a film I think he made in 1975, where he presents, and we watched the beginning of Hala in our class, where he presents a man who is simply impotent. He will go further in Mandabi. We watch Mandabi, where we see a man who has many wives, but who has no power at all because he has no money. Even reading he cannot do, even catching his money he cannot catch. He's totally dependent on a mandate on money order coming from France. So we have a man who has lost everything and who is really fed, by his wives and who is fed by his nephew. So that combination of disempowering of men and empowering of women appears constantly in the films of Semen Usman. And you have it displayed, for instance, in another one, Fat Kine, where you have a very powerful woman, Fat Kine, and her two totally important men. So you have that empowering of women also in the film you watch together, Molade, where it is the women who decide over the fate of the girls, that the girls are not going to be, to be cut as he said in the film. And when the husband, and please finish watching that film, you will see the ideological position that Semen Usman takes there, when the husband, who is totally impotent in front of his own brother, tries to exert violence on his wives. So that is an ideological position. This is the presentation of women as an ideological tool, I would even say as an ideological instrument. And it started, for instance, already in 1963 with Borom Saret, where at the end of the film, the main character is a man, but at the end of the film, you see the woman gives her daughter, her child to the man to carry and decides to go out. What's she going to do out? Nobody knows. To prostitute herself. Anyway, she's the one who is going to come back and feed the family, because after a whole day of tribulations, etc., the husband comes back home with no money. So what we are having here is the construction of women on the back of a man. It's a man who is writing the script. It's a man who is a filmmaker, etc., etc. But he's the one who scripts women, who scripts women, who writes gender as an ideological tool. And that one is clearly different from what we had in Alpha Win, where woman is the object of desire, where woman is, is looked at, where woman is actually observed, desired, loved, etc., with its multiple possibilities. And it's, of course, also different from the representation of women we had in The Silence of the Palace, where a different tradition, the tradition coming from Egyptian, theater, is at play. It's different from what we have in Cairo Station, where we had a strong a star really appearing in the middle of the film and structuring everything around her. So we have multiple possibilities of films made by men. One exception here amongst the films I did mention is certainly The Silence of the Palace, made by Clatley, where we have the story of growing up during colonialism and a scripture of what it means to be a woman that is totally different, even though the script itself was written by a man, right? What I'm trying to say here is that the composition of gender in African cinema will always have to take into account the fact that films after colonialism that were made by Africans were made in general by men. Genova has a question. I have a question about Alpha Wing. Do you feel like it can be considered a feminist film, or is it being feminist a byproduct of its original intent? That is exactly what I'm trying to address. To see, hello, Stephen. Hello, Stephen. Yes, I think that's what I'm trying to say here. It is that we have multiple layers. You will always have to remember first that feminism is a discourse. So it's a discourse that is philosophical, that is legal. It is a discourse that, let me stop that because people added me into a Facebook group, a WhatsApp group there, and they're sending things I don't want to read. Feminism is a discourse that is political, that's legal, that's philosophical, etc., etc., etc. So when I say that Semen Ousmane uses female characters as a figure of a philosophical position, that is what I mean. So his feminism is a philosophical disposition. In his own life, Semen Ousmane, one can talk about something else, but the succession of films that he made, particularly because most of his films, if not all of them, had women as the leading role, his form of feminism has to be addressed. That's number one. Now, Alpha Wing comes from a different disposition. Alpha Wing comes from the tradition of Egyptian cinema, where at the center of the film, you have the belly dancer. That in itself is a very much masculine, it's a very much macho form of cinema. It's a total male gaze that presents women as an object. So Alpha Wing tries to subvert that by taking, instead of the position of a male looking, you remember, for instance, in The Silence of the Palace, when the belly dancer was dancing, you have all those men looking. You remember even in the short film, black and white, that we watched, about the Nile, where the belly dancer is dancing to, you have all those men watching, right? And you even remember in Cairo Station, when the belly dancer again appears, you have all those men watching. It goes so far as to have pin-ups, etc. Alpha Wing tries to subvert that in taking the position of a child. So in doing that, I will say that it is an attempt at a feminist film in a tradition that in itself is very much macho, is very much objectifying against women. And now, if you remember another layer, the script, the script of Alpha Wing is written by the same person who wrote the script of The Silence of the Palace, which is Nouri Bouzid. You read the text of Nouri Bouzid. So All those layers will have to be taken into account. So the composition of Alpha Wayne, the scriptwriter is a man, Nouri Bouzid. The filmmaker is a man, it is Bougadier. And he composes a film that subverts the male gaze of traditional Egyptian cinema. So I will say it is an attempt of a feminist film. I will say that, definitely. I will say that. Okay. Very good question, Geneva. Very good question. Excellent one. Now let us come back to the Semen Ousmane. Semen Ousmane composes those different characters of women by disempowering men and empowering women. So he does those two gestures from film to film, all of his films. He disempowers men and he empowers women. Bougadier, inside a different tradition, the tradition of Egyptian cinema based on the male gaze, he subverts that by rather taking the position of a child, of being naive, of discovering the world, of having something, not knowing anything. When Semen Ousmane goes from the very much installed discourse of the left that runs back to the 18th century, really, to the 18th century Enlightenment philosophy, you will have the female character as an important chapter of the discourse of liberation, of emancipation, etc. So Semen Ousmane takes that position, right? So we have, therefore, two attempts at subverting the traditional representation that we already had at play in Hubert Ogunde, when he presents his wives as being part of his theater, or in Doro Ladipo, when he presents his wives as being part of his theater. He marries them and they become actresses. He even says that they are useful. They are useful for his theater. So the presentation of being a tool practically for of display, right, and of self-representation. That, in general, is the tradition from where African cinema comes. That, in general, is the tradition from where African cinema comes. And that is the tradition from where it subverts colonial cinema. That is what it uses to critique colonial cinema that was racist. In other words, a critique of racism is in itself liberationary. It calls for liberation. It presents women as the subjects of liberation, but it is still composed by men. It is interesting to see into the multiple chapters that it opens: philosophical, representational, technological, religious, etc., moral, ethical, etc., etc. But it is still made by men. It's still made by men. At the center of it, you can have a star, for instance. In the case of the Egyptian cinema, you have the belly dancer as the eternal star, or you have a subversion even of that star. But it's still a film, films made by men. You can even have attempts, for instance, with The Silence of the Palace, a film written by, done by women, but it is written by a man. So it's very much difficult, I would say, to overlook the complexity of the composition of gender discourse in African cinema. It is very much difficult. And it is, a challenge that one has to address. Before opening the chapter now of films made by women, because the first woman, African woman, who comes to make a film will do that on the backbone of all those films that are made by women already, in which women were used as tools, in which women were used as characters, as representations of an idea, etc., etc. So the first African filmmaker who comes to make a film will have to do that on the backbone of such a tradition, because that tradition composes a taste, an expectation, composes a culture, cinematographic culture. And in amongst the what I posted on Blackboard there, you have a film made by Safi Faye. I insisted this time particularly on West Africa only, because West Africa can help us see into an evolution in cinematographic evolution. And I took particularly films made Ghana, Nigeria, and by Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegalese, because we can see how a film tradition is composed by not having 53 countries totally. Only a few of them can give us an idea. If you take Safi Faye, you have a link to her film there, Mosane, a film made in 1996. That's her second film. Her first film, I couldn't have access to it, but that one is expressive enough. We have a film made now by a woman. I could not find a version with English subtitles. So the version you have there has French subtitles and subtitles in Portuguese. So with that, you have now a film made by a woman. Safi Faye is the first female filmmaker from Senegal. She went through a school of learning cinema that is similar to the one that Semaine Ousmane went through, because she is a student of Jean Rouch. Jean Rouch is the one who made the film Moins Noir. What's the title in English? We watched some parts of it about that young veteran who is walking in the docks in Côte d'Ivoire, in Abidjan, and who struggles to find his way, etc., etc. And we'll come back to him because he became a filmmaker later on, and we'll also come back to Safi Faye. In any case, with Safi Faye Mosane, we have now the classical example of an African woman who makes films in her own terms. And successful, she's successful at that. I did not introduce a film, like I've said, because I could not find a version with English subtitles. But you have on Blackboard there, a version with French and with Portuguese subtitles. And you can see how she tells a story of peasants. You can see how she tells a story of love with a language that I'd like you to analyze, that I would like you to compare with the films made by men using women as either tool or as tools for an idea or as characters. I'd like you to compare. But what I like us as touchstone for the session of today to remember is that before the first woman comes to make a film, takes a camera and makes a film, she actually has to respond to well-meaning African men who made films on her back. Well-meaning African men who use her. In the case of Dora Ladipo, you cannot say that he did not love his wives. In the case of Hubert Ogunde, it's the same. And he says it himself, who used his wife to compose an art of representation. So they have to react to that tradition of, I would say, well-meaning male liberal feminism, and to compose now a form of cinema that still needs to be analyzed in its own terms. Of course, one can say that there are not sufficient films to be able to compose a discourse of what Black African feminism means. Many things can be said. One can say that one needs to have from Senegal enough, maybe 10 films made by women to be able to see what it means to be a woman and to make films in Senegal. And you will not have 10 films made by women. You will not, because the quality of those films, not the quality of those, finding the funding for those films is a very much challenging task. You will hardly find money. And even if you take Cameroon, you will have it difficult to establish a corpus of many films that will make it possible for you to define the constitution of what it means to be, to do Black feminist film. It will be very difficult to have only women. If you take, for instance, Nigeria, the same challenge will appear. But now, one of the questions that one may ask, it is, does cinema have to be exclusionary all the time? Because, of course, making a film is a matter of a team. So you have many people, and women are part of that team. So does it have to be exclusionary, where one will simply always have to see that there is a filmmaker who makes a film and who is a woman, therefore one can say we have a Black feminist film? That is a question I may want to leave you with, to have you think about. But I will suggest that if, and I hope you have time, that you watch some parts of Safi Faye's Mosane. It's a very beautiful film, and I think you will enjoy it, even because there are not that many words in the film. It's not discursive. You have lots of visuals, and she's a very good, camera person. So watch the film and enjoy it. It's a film made in 1996. It didn't have that much exposure for the reason that I mentioned, because it lacks the funding, and those films were made thanks to the help of France, or because of the help of the French government. It will apply to many other countries. But I see, yes, Steven, yes, I already agree, Steven. So, but what is possible though, still, even if from inside one country it will be difficult to have a corpus strong enough to be able to talk about Black feminist filmmaking, it is possible to combine all the films made from from all the countries from Africa and see what women see. And that one, Fanta Nako in Burkina Faso, Safi Faye in Senegal, etc., etc. To be able to have a substantial discourse, a voice, an African voice by women in cinema. That one is possible. And now we can compare and see, for instance, what is made in the Maghreb. Clatli, for instance, will be an example, and you compare what Safi Faye does. That one is a very good topic to do, and I would like somebody maybe to think about writing something about it. That would be a very good topic. But yet, is it necessary to toss away the films made by men? No. They were the backbone. They are the backbone out of which those films were made. And I come back to Safi Faye. She's important because she's one of those who combines the three chapters of African cinema. On the one hand, colonial films. She worked with Jean Rouch, and Jean Rouch is one of those who trained her. So she comes from colonial films and tosses colonial films away. And she is installed in the tradition of post-independence, African cinema, and yet she is a woman. So she goes through the three steps of the dialectical steps of the constitution of, African cinema. When we talk about Semen Ousmane, next to him you have Met Hondo, Sarawinia, and in your article, many of you mentioned Sarawinia. Yes, that is one of those forms of male feminism, right? Like Semen Ousmane is a classical example of male feminism. Roughly, that is what I wanted us to talk about today. Obviously, the session is likely to be shorter than what our classes are, because I'm not screening the films that will have added some more. Okay, here's the question. Fabrizio, do you think these feminist films receive backlash for tackling very hot topics from men with conservative views in these African countries when the films came out? I think you have a couple of films. In Kenya, for instance, there's a film made by a woman that was banned, because she tackled the issue of, female sexuality. Safi Faye's film had a very difficult time in Senegal, I would say. Yes, and she could not make lots of films, particularly because her films are very much explicit sexually, and Senegal is a quite conservative culture. So I would say, and Lately, she could make, I think, only 2 films. After The Silence of the Palace, she made Un été à la boulette, and that was it. So she actually did not have that much success. You have a balance of many things in the career of a female filmmaker, one of which is that cinema, the cinema world, I think today, one man was sentenced. No? I think it is a very much genderized, it's a very much oppressive, it's a world. I have so many friends, women who work in it. Those men, they want sex, and otherwise you are not making a film. And if you say no, you have no career. So it is a brutal world, the world of cinema, brutal against women who want to make films. So there, I'll say for those Black women, it is very much challenging, more so because they very often look for government funding, and it's not a given feat. So I'll agree with you there. The backlash is not only in terms of censorship from outside, it's also from inside in terms of the refusal to give funds to those filmmakers, simply the impossibility for them to have a career that goes further than one film. Yes. Genova is saying, could that have to do with why the struggle with funding as well? Yes. It's a very much. I've never seen a world that's as biased as the world of cinema, because I think even, I grew up with all those actors and filmmakers, etc. It is a world in which it seems to me people go to have sex, and it is even worse than in the music, in the music business. So therefore, it is very much challenging for a female filmmaker to impose her personality as a filmmaker. As an actress, that one is a given since the 19th century, but as a filmmaker, it is more challenging. And the few examples that I mentioned, there's Safi Faye, for instance, Lately, or etc. They are very few. Now, our simple would like, since we are discussing here now, I'd like to mention the case of Germany, because it is so constraining for female filmmakers. Tizin Dangamba, a couple of other examples. When Germany made it possible, decided, the Film Academy of Berlin decided to train specifically Black female filmmakers. So many younger Black female filmmakers are trained in Germany at the Film Academy of Berlin. And it's a policy to try and do something against the general exclusion that Black women face in the film industry and in general, and particularly on the African continent. So I will say you have some institutions, for instance, the Germans, for instance, Berlin, the Berlin Film Academy, where there is already an understanding that something has to be done, and that filmmakers like Safi Faye, who is so talented, will not have their career simply stop because of lack of funding, or have their films banned, like for instance Mosane, because it presents sexuality in a way that the traditional culture doesn't necessarily accept. Yes, Genova, I agree with you totally. Okay, so having said that, I will conclude by having you simply remember that there is a dialectical evolution in African cinema that goes from colonialism to films made by African men in a very much traditional sense first, but with that pocket in Ghana of very subversive, gender roles, to the totally traditional Yoruba presentation of Doro Ladipo, etc., and Hubert Ogunde. And now you have an evolution since the 90s. 90s is the time we are talking about, 90s, where you have female filmmakers appearing on the landscape, even though with Safi Faye, one can come back to her first film made in 1973, but that one was such a flash, such an impossible appearance, and she needed 20 more years before she could make another film. But the 90s are the year where you have Safi Faye, you have Lately, you have other people, other women making films. So that is all for today. I thank you very much. It was a very good session here. I think this is the channel, so that is where we'll have all our classes until the end of the semester. So what I'll do, I'll send you in a couple of days or so the topics for the midterm, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And see you on, have a good break and, remain healthy. And good night, Sandra. Good night, everybody. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.